Good evening, everyone. It's a special honor for me to introduce Hrayr Eulmessekian today. The honor is doubled when doing so before such a distinguished audience. I've known Hrayr since 2008 or 2009. Mark, let me know if I'm incorrect. From Los Angeles, when I was an undergraduate at UCLA. Armenian, if you recall, dear Hrayr, our Eastern Armenian professor, would host me, my sister, other students and friends of hers, into her house near Pasadena, and which were basically literary, artistic, intellectual evenings. And Hrayr would attend these gatherings quite punctually, I should say. That is where I got to interact with him at length for the first time. I was surprised how generous and non-judgmental Hrayr was. Maybe it's surprising for someone coming from Armenia, I don't know, from my background. With time, we have become collaborators, and dare I say friends. I recall rich conversations full of laughter and too many kunefe jibnis.
Yeah.
That delicious Lebanese cheesecake, what I call it now.
Yeah.
That we would actually eat at our brew store and then not so much at the brew store. Over the years, Hrayr has not ceased to amaze me with his generosity and kindness. As an artist, Hrayr Eulmessekian is exceptionally rare to the point of being irreplaceable for an entire generation. He sees the generation of Armenians born in Beirut about a decade and a half after World War II, having been formed in a growing and rather ambitious culture and educational milieu of the Armenian community of Beirut, by, for instance, attending the famous Gemaran, the most prestigious institution of secondary education for the Armenians in Beirut. Hrayr has also experienced the violence of the Lebanese Civil War and the bitterness of forced exile. In Beirut, he studies arts and makes his first contribution as a Western Armenian writer, an activity that he continues with some maybe inconsistency, I don't know, to engage into this day. After moving to the United States in the mid-'80s, he settles in San Francisco and receives a BFA and then an MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute, another key institution for us today, I would say. As you can see, what makes Hrayr exceptionally rare, aside from the fact that after moving to Los Angeles around 2005, he has shot many weddings.
No, before that.
Even before that?
Before that, I had stopped doing, I moved to Los Angeles.
Then I got the facts wrong, but the weddings is there. It's the fact that he profoundly inhabits and draws from two cultural worlds and artistic sensibilities. To such an extent that it is not an exaggeration to state that Hrayr Eulmessekian's layered multimedia and meditative contributions are creative acts of cultural translation, of the kind that is direly needed for any diasporic emergence. With this said, I'm convinced that it is a distinct privilege to have him among us today. I thank once again Melanie and the Armenian Studies program at the University of Michigan for making this evening possible. With the artist talk that Hrayr Eulmessekian has agreed to give us and the screening of his film Vahé Oshagan between acts, followed by a discussion, we are in for a special treat tonight. Taline Voskeritchian, as you know already, the translator of the film, a wonderful person and a true intellectual, is here and will join us through video conferencing. And so without further ado, let us welcome Hrayr Eulmessekian to the stage.
Well, thank you, Garen, for that very generous introduction. And I remember those evenings at Anahid's. It was, and we actually read Vahé Oshagan at the time, Anatsortats. I would like to thank the department. I would like Melanie, Kathleen, who I haven't met yet, Naira, everything, and Chris for the. I'm going to start with the Cliff Notes version of my PowerPoint. I don't want to extend too much. I just want to go through the works. I want to give time for the film because the film itself is about 50 minutes, 53 minutes, so that we can have more discussions later on. Just a brief background about on the background. This PowerPoint. This is a series that I've been working on since 91 or 92. So I have a whole set of works that go under this heading. I will tell you what it means later on, but I'm going to start from here. And this PowerPoint I put together because in 2016 we did a show in Glendale at the Abril bookstore, and I have to insist about our Abril bookstore. Is the, as far as I know, it's the most active cultural. It's not an organization, but it's the place where a lot happens. Most of the activities happen there, and Arno needs a lot of support. So he wanted to do an exhibition of my work because he has a gallery space, and I said, why don't we Mark Nishanian had done an extended interview with me for his GUM review number 6, and the works had never been shown. So everybody had read about the work, and nobody had seen the work. I said, why don't we combine them? And these are the works that I picked for the interview, and this is the PowerPoint. And we had the discussion where Mark asked, why don't they do anything? I said, maybe we explained too well that nobody needs to see the work anymore, or they already knew everything, so they didn't bother. The first one, this is 1992. This is San Francisco Market Street. These are the bus stops over there. And this is a work about immigration. And it had different, from people from different countries, mainly from South America at the time. And the artists who approached me were both Taiwanese. And they said, you know, we want you in this series, and the heading was, I have something to say. So each immigrant has something to say. And my question was, I've been searching for home. Where is home? It's the other way around. Most immigrants do come here in order to find a home. And for me, I was still in search. And at the time, I had a daughter, so I have another picture with my daughter next to this. And it wasn't an abstract thing. I was trying to find somewhere to call it home. Now, this predates that other one because that idea of home was before I was dealing with that idea of where is home before. And this is a painting. My training is in experimental film. But because of, if you're in a graduate program and you have time and you're on campus a lot, you take classes. And and I took a painting class, and this is one of the first paintings I did. And I showed it in my MFA show. And this is just the background. So this is where it's coming, kind of. And then the varnish, the house is painted in varnish on top of the background. So the whole painting is not varnished, only the house is the varnish. And there are the security lights. And they're triggered by motion. And the room is darkened. The person who goes in triggers the light, and the artwork starts. Before that, there is no artwork. You're not seeing anything. But because it's a varnish, it's a mirror. So the work takes you in. On top of that, immigrant, intruder, into a culture. We're coming in. We're having into this art world. I'm studying at a place where they're interested in art in a very structural way. And if you bring your identity, your own narrative, is not, even at a place like San Francisco Art Institute in San Francisco, is not very accepting. They don't want you, they want you to talk about surveillance, this and that, whatever it is at the time, video art that was dealing with all kinds of issues, mainly structural, but they did not accept the fact that you're coming from a place, you lived an incredibly dangerous life, you went through dangerous events, and that experience cannot come into the work. So this is the intruder. getting into the picture. I'm going to switch gears now because, as I said, it's the Cliff Notes version. So this is jumping to 1994. I was asked to, and I was hired by Vahé Oshagan, both regional, to make the film that you're going to see later on, and then from San Francisco chapter to make something as a gift for Vahé. So I came up with this idea. Vahé was in Australia at the time. I called him long distance, no Skype, no nothing. And then I said, I want something from you that's not been published. I'm going to publish this. This is going to be my way of publishing your work. So he sent this poem that's titled Michnarar. And when what I did, I used an I printed it on acetate. These are 5 layers, back to back, lined up exactly, one behind each other. And in a way, the idea was, well, the poem itself has a depth. And the other thing that came up, like, it was hard to read. And why everybody says Vahé is hard to read. So I made it physically hard to read. But what you see in the background, that yellowish green, this was supposed to be a dissolve, not a pixelation, but it's phosphorescent paint. So the idea, I gave this to Vahé and I said, you hang this next to the last light you turn off before you go to bed. Vahé Oshagan did not like it. So I gave it to him. They gave him a pen, some kind of a fancy, whatever, mountain, some kind of a Mont Blanc. There you go.
They're expensive.
Yeah. I have a whole lot of series of work related to phosphorescent paint, and I also did my MFA midterm review with using phosphorescent paint, and I made a 3-dimensional house in a studio, which dissolves eventually, fades out. Doesn't dissolve, it fades out. So depends on how long you want to sit in the installation, anywhere between an hour and an hour and a half, because your eyes get used to the light, but then eventually it just fades out. So I have a lot of work with phosphorescent, but that's kind of the two combined. This wasn't supposed to be there. And this, after that, Vahé, after we did the Jubilee commemorations were over, he wrote a letter from Australia, told me that we should continue collaborating, but we should keep it a secret. Vahé likes things secret. Don't advertise with. I did this film, and we can talk about it at the end of the Michnarar. But this is the title, and this is dealing with translation. It starts with translated in parentheses, but it's transliterated. And there's no translation in the film. Nothing is translated. I just wanted to bring the issue up what it is that the translating poetry, or from the one language to the other, and especially Vahé's poetry. At the time I thought this was impossible. Now I stand. Taline made me think twice about that. These are series from on Deep Background again. These are from family photographs. There's layered 5 of them, and framed that way. I'm going to jump on from this one. Now I come to San Francisco, and I started I wanted to bring the issue of violence and war, but I did not want to retell tackle or tell the history of Lebanon. And this is the Presidio. It's an army or a navy base. Now they closed this thing. And these were the old cannons trained on the Pacific defending from Japanese invasion coming from the Pacific. It's all over San Francisco. If you go in, the cannons are not there anymore. This is an old picture. They removed the cannons. Now, these are where they were mounted. These are treated exactly the same way. This is Battery East, and five layers. So each one of them is a separate picture. It's not the same picture that's printed five times. It's 5 different pictures that are layered. So going back, in a way. And then I picked up a canvas and went, draped the whole thing. I took this gasoline thing, which was filled with water, by the way. I wasn't planning on. And I spent the whole day. I have multiple prints of these. And this is the result. This is titled Facelift. And the first time I showed this work, Mark brought up the idea of the Shroud of Turin. Probably there's something there. I'm not sure. So this was the first time I showed. This is 6x7, and this is the installation, and this is at Abril Bookstore, and the video that's illuminating the work are the warning signs at the procedure that you cannot take pictures. And then it's cut with this. It was just at this point I'm just trying the idea. I had this footage from again late 90s. This is the Pacific. So that's the rust from the cannon, and that's the target. That's where the enemy is going to come from, and that's where the thing. Marine headlands. The whole of that area is covered with this. So my connection with the bunkers go back from the second day we landed in San Francisco. My uncle took us over. Somebody in the family took us over for a tour, and instead of looking at the Golden Gate Bridge, we were looking at the bunkers. I said, cements are so thick that you can survive a 150 millimeter round. That's what we were. That's what we were thinking about. We weren't. The scenery is one thing, but so that's one way of going back and working with the. This is the Nike missile. These are nuclear. They would carry nuclear warheads. Again, they're defensive. They are allowed to keep this according to the SALT Treaty. And I made pictures. The pictures that you saw, the layered pictures, I went around and photographed all of them. So I have a whole catalog of typologies. Then I actually wanted to work with with targets and I had seen this Tabor engineering driving down the 101 every day. So one day I said I was going to walk in and venture to walk in and see. And I hadn't been in a shooting range, and I went in, and I didn't know how I was going to be received. I didn't know what they were going to accept me or not, but I had an idea I wanted to pursue. And I went over and I walked in, and I see this Lebanese flag in the office, the owner's office, all signed. Autographed. And I went in and asked, what's the idea? What's the thing, the story behind this? And he said he was stationed with the Marines in Lebanon in 82 when they blew up the barracks. He was there. So those were all soldiers that had signed. He participated with the rescue of the Marines, and then and then that's the story. And I said, I have this thing that I want to, and I was in Lebanon at the time when it happened. So I said, this is something I want to work with. And he said, anytime. Just come in before opening in the morning and it's yours. So I went in and I took this, as this is just so at the time I was trying to have an argument with Jasper Jones's targets. So I said that so I took in these papers and I hired a mercenary. I don't own a handgun. And I hired the people who worked there, and I would buy them a box of bullets, rounds, and they would go in and just shoot at the target at random, at the paper at random. But then all of them are bullseye. And if you can see this is a varnish. You cannot see the target. So how did it happen that all of them are bullseye? Well, the target hit the hole, not the. So I printed, silk screened the target on the bullet hole. Smart. And then I took pictures of the background. So these are just, I don't know how thick they are, what the gauge on this stuff is. It's fairly thick, but they are hung behind the paper, behind the target. And this is a ramp at the end. So the bullet hits and then round it goes up. So this one slows down takes some of the energy away from the round. And this is a very familiar scene in Lebanon. You see metal. Whoever's been there in war zones see how bent metal is. Just when you're a kid, you think you hide behind the metal. It's the strongest thing. It's not. So I retouched. So I retouched on the side. This is before and after. My question here is, which one is the destruction in the photograph? The retouched one, or because the retouching is destroying the document. I have a few of these. Now this is the one I finished especially for this PowerPoint. This is 2 weeks old. If you look carefully, you will see the reverse, the photoshopping of the holes. It's clustered over there now, but it keeps on changing. This is an hour and 20 minutes long, so I'm not going to take up that much time. And this is an installation piece. So it becomes eventually, at the end. So these are the way this, unless people want to sit through an hour, 20 minutes of watching this in a movie theater, this is going to be installation. Like I will have 8 of them spread in a. Is it moving? No, it's not. These are the same pictures that as you saw before when I did the layers. This is a film. This is 2005. It's called bruitage. Bruitage is the French word of incidental sound, when editors bring in sound that's supposed to be in the scene or outside of the scene to make it sound, to make the scene look more natural. And these are old family photographs. This is the scan, but it's only backgrounds of photographs. You don't see people. The word bruitage, or bruit translated to noise, is the grain of the photograph. This was finished in 2005, but I reworked this last year in 4K. now it's 8K, so I'm going to probably work in 8K because I didn't want the artifacts. That version did not have the resolution. High definition did not have the resolution, so the artifacts the pixelation was getting in the way of working. Even like that, and it's interesting that I sent a copy of this to Armenia for the Golden Apricot. I knew they were going to show it, but I said, let's see how they're going to respond. And they said, we're not showing animation this year. There's nothing animated in this. And but they did show the Teddy Gang the first year of the festival. This is an hour long. This version that I put in is the first scene and the last scene. And and it's also based on the pre-photographic cinema, which were the panoramas. There were huge paintings that were on scrolls, and people would, somebody would narrate or play music over or narrate. Usually it's a narration. And they're oil painting, and they usually depict wars or important events like coronations and stuff like that. This was, interestingly, the people who were more interested in this were the Arab curators, and this was screened at Art Dubai. And I got invited to Sharjah because of it, to the Biennale, because they were interested in, I guess, in one way of looking at their own situation. And this film, I say, people will never forget. If they sit through the film, they will never forget the film, not because it's something that's unforgettable, but they will not forget that they managed to sit through an hour of this. So I wasn't happy with the sound, and I fixed the sound. And one day, whenever I have a time, this is the last scene, is a collection of all the sounds in the film, but in reverse. So it goes back. Oh, that's one. I did this one composition. I've done one music composition, and it was published. So it's a minute long. If you want to listen, I'll play it. If not, I'll go. Cooling towers. This is a continuation. I was talking with Garen the other day because I think he showed this in lately.
Well, if I just may say, we're using this with your kind permission for the workshop that we're putting together in February with Anush soon.
Okay, then.
As a visual element.
Okay, great. These are from the Beckers, German couple, Hilla and Bernd Becker. The photographers, and I borrowed the pictures from them. These are cooling towers, and I have a whole. I love their photography. This is one of the few photographers that I like around, and I stumbled into their work at the Frankel Gallery in the '80s in San Francisco, and ever since then I've been, that's what photography is for me. I know it's not the motion. You don't stop the motion. You don't do it. It's just like it's still, but it's whatever they're taking pictures of are deteriorating. So the idea of it being already deteriorated and then still the process. This is from Water Tower, but this is a new series, and I started working on bunkers. So it's a varnish of bunkers, and the bunker will take you in the same. Going back to the. Now this is Solemnity. This is a video installation work with. This was done for the Blind Dates projects. Niri Melkonian did at the Pratt Institute. Niri and Daphne, yes. And I was the artist, and my date was Anait Kasabian, who is a scholar, film scholar, and she retired now, but she taught at Fordham and then Liverpool. And I wanted to work with somebody from the media studies. And this is a sketch. This is not this isn't part of the proposal, but I'll come back. So that's the March of the Armenians, the picture, the most iconic pictures that used everywhere. It's extreme close-up. We have 100 speakers facing the picture, the wall, not coming from the picture as it's traditional film. And the sounds are contemporary writers, poets. Anahid was having immigration issues with the British government. She read the letter of, like, why are they not allowing her to go to work there and things like that. We have people from all over the world, and this is from the Ottoman, the remnants of the Ottoman Empire, whoever the cultures from the after the Ottoman Empire broke up, and they're all talking to the pictures. The picture, that one, I chose the most iconic picture because there is this. Oh, it's not a theory. It's the voice coming, the all-knowing voice coming from the film, with no body. You don't see the person talking. You just this notion of God, and this is reversing that process. There's not one voice. There is 100 of them, and I want to multiply this. And this is, again, high definition. I want to do a 4K. That's obscene, but that's and the scan is an hour long, so you hardly see it moving. I have this is side view. This is the close-up. This is about 2 minutes long. If you want to watch this, this gives you a better idea of the scale of the work. And so if you're stepping away from the work, if you hear all these different voices all mixed up, all mixing in the space, but then and you can hardly see the movement. So that shows the scale. That's Donald's mom, by the way. Okay, now on the background. These are the ground rules for interviewing a State Department officials. And this is from their website. The link is there. If I click it, it will jump over. The source cannot be quoted or identified in any manner, not even as an unnamed source. The information is usually couched in such phrases as it is understood that it has been learned. The information may be used to help present the story or to gain a better understanding of the subject, but the knowledge is that of the reporter, not the source. No information provided may be used in the story. The information is only for the reporter's background knowledge. So that's why on deep background. And this is on deep background, and this is my take. This is my artist statement, and it's the cover-up. What becomes of the story when the authority, I guess that's me, confining only on basis of deep background, and its reporter, again, are one and the same, and in search for meaning are conspiring to cover up the official narrative. This is another work with Vahé. Well, this was 86 or 85 or 86. We had just moved again to San Francisco around that same time, and I had just started going to attending the Art Institute, and I went. Vahé and Arshak were going to. Arshak is a collaborator. Most of Vahé's works are illustrated by with Arshak's work, and they were going to have a show at the community center, and I borrowed my cousin's video camera, bulky, huge stuff at the time, and I put it up like a surveillance camera, and I recorded the whole evening. It started when it was announced the show was going to start at the time, and then I turned off when everybody went home. But I hadn't shown this anywhere. When we did the Abril event, I said to Arno, why don't we feed the footage to your surveillance monitors? So when people walk in, and hardly anybody noticed that everybody thought it was the live feed coming from the surveillance cameras. I had to point out to people, no, that's 1986, 85 or 86, this is an old thing. And so it was perfect. I loved it, and it was the first time I didn't know how to show this. But when I saw the monitors, I said, that's what we were. And what Arno did was he fed the sound coming from this to the gallery. So people were hearing that exhibition sound in the gallery next door. And now for something, and now I think this is done. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not done. This used to cover the window of my studio in San Francisco. It says laughter is serious. This is an argument with Vahé, by the way. And then the other one, you can't live in San Francisco without picking up some Zen. So single hand clapping sounds exactly like two hands clapping without the noise. And now for something completely different. Can we start the film?
Yes.
Hrayr just gave the artist talk. We saw the film, and we're happy that you're joining us to have a Q&A.
And one other thing, the compositions, the music is all Hrayr Talibian's work, Taline's husband.
Yes.
And
So I can actually start with a question myself. Actually, I'll just throw it into the air. But then, if you feel like it, you can ask some more questions, and then Hrayr and Taline can take them up, and then if there's more time, we can do another round. How do you feel about that? All right, let's do that. So I was actually intrigued by Hrayr in the beginning of your artist talk about this idea of being an intruder.
mm-hmm.
And so basically, this is what happened. I had a different set of questions, but I'm putting them aside and asking you what intrigued me now. So you talked about this, you kind of mentioned this idea of being an intruder, but also being partially accepted. Right, you said they want to hear this thing about yourself, but they don't want to hear the other thing, right?
That's true.
So I wonder if you could maybe speak a little bit more about those experiences as a diasporan maybe, or as an artist, in fact, and kind of maybe open some of the parentheses or maybe add something to this idea of being an intruder or being partially accepted.
How much time do we have? No. It's very interesting, and it is important. It's not a blanket there were pockets of acceptances. At the time, the department that was the most avant-garde, was considered the most avant-garde, was the PV department, the performance video department. So performance art started in the 60s, 70s, 80s had come, and the Art Institute has had a very strong faculty. But they were not really interested. They were more interested in conceptual, in pure concepts. So in pure concepts, your background does not have a lot of place, even though Joseph Beuys, who was one of the first performance artists, dealt with his autobiography most of the time. But no, that belongs to the big wars, the big thing. But then when you come as a person from your own experience, having experienced all of the violence, then you are in a way their subject. You are not there to do the work for the thing. But it was I will say, if you go into the diaspora experience, and when I was talking about the midterm review, in MFA you go through a midterm review, so to see that you're not taking up space so they kick you out if they don't like. What I did was I did build a house, almost a room-sized house that looked like a house, and with phosphorescent strings that drew themselves in the dark, stayed up, and then disappeared, and then faded out. And I had one of the most, the panel, on my panel I had 3 professors, we didn't have professors, sorry, teachers. So one was Chinese American, one Jewish American, and a Filipino. And I'm the Armenian from Lebanon. So we had the most interesting conversation about diaspora. So that way it was accepted. And I did my MFA without shooting even one frame of film. I did most of it installation and video work, but I didn't do any film. It was accepted in certain pockets. In other departments we had issues. So it's not a blanket thing, but is that enough? Or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you feel like it's enough, then it's enough. Yeah.
I just forgot the rest after your question.
No, I'll just add one quick idea.
Yeah.
So it seems that both in the interview that you had with Mark Nishanian at the GOM review,
yeah.
which was when in 2006?
We did the interview in 2002. It was published in 2005. I think 2003, and then 2005 was published.
There too, there is a question of the visibility of the diaspora.
Yeah.
So it seems that experience has a personal dimension for you as well. So maybe if it interests the audience, we can talk about that more.
In the way, I was accepted because they accepted me in the program. Mm-hmm. I mean, the MFA at the Art Institute was is very difficult to get in. It's the year I got in, they only accepted 3 students, and 2 of them came with major grants or scholarships, and I was the only Armenian with nothing. I was working weekends and to pay my tuition.
So I want to remind the audience that Taline Voskeritchian has basically done the translation of the film.
Yeah.
So if we could turn maybe towards the film, and I could also open up the conversation, please. Ron?
So I'd like to ask Taline a question. So Hrayr said earlier that Vahé Oshagan was a very difficult writer. And he made a piece that showed how difficult it was, because we couldn't read that either. So how difficult, or what kinds of problems did you face, and how did you work with them in turning his unique Armenian into English?
Yes, there were difficulties. As you have seen, the film has 3 different kinds of Western Armenian. There is the biographical Western Armenian, he was born here, he lived there. And then there is the commentary by Mark and Krikor and all these people. And then there is the poetry. And yes, the poetry was the most difficult. The difficulties were of 2 kinds. First of all, I think they were difficulties related to the span of Western Armenian. And Vahé Oshagan's understanding of the place of Western Armenian in his poetry, but also in the diaspora. Vahé Oshagan's poetry is a poetry of the city. And the city, whether it's Beirut or Paris or Philadelphia or Los Angeles or Sydney or anywhere, is a place where there are all sorts of people. The anonymity of humanity is represented there. And I think the first difficulty we faced was just this, that it was not the pure Armenian, the literary Armenian that we often think about when we think about the poetry of Western Armenian. So that's one thing. So, for instance, like you saw, there are curse words, there are 4-letter words, there are all sorts of interruptions that come into the text out of nowhere. And usually these are the subsoil, the subtext. the lower depths of language, if you will. So that was one problem that we faced. But I think the other problem around, which I think was, and I think Hrayr would agree with me, because we worked together most of the time on the translation, is that there is a kind of rhythm to Vahé Oshagan's poetry, which is very difficult to capture in English. It's a rhythm that reaches nowhere. It's for him, I think that is the diaspora. The diaspora is this thing that goes nowhere. And on top of it, you put the idea of the absurd, and then you have a complete, it's almost chaotic in a way. And I think in the poetry itself, there is a lot of panic. It's a panicked poetry. And that, for us, was quite difficult to transpose, to translate, to render in English. The other problem, there was a third problem, was that we were working from sound rather than text. 90% of the time, we worked from sound, and that was a decision we made together, that we were not going to go back. The poems that we had that were in text, we did not want to go to them. We wanted to hear the sound. As Hrayr Eulmessekian says, the universe begins in sound, and he also says in the film, he says, the poet for Oshagan is the listener. So that in itself was very difficult, is that we were not working from established text. We were working from what we were hearing on the screen, which created, in a way, we were returning sound to literature. And that, I think, was quite difficult. Those were the three areas. I don't know if I've answered you, but I've tried.
Wonderful.
Also, this was for subtitle. Subtitle formatting is different than print translation. I mean, if you translate for print, you have the leisure of stretching the right, but we had to have a certain amount of characters for a certain amount of time on the screen, so people can catch up with. Yeah.
Great. Yes.
Also, I think.
All right. Why don't you say what you were thinking, Taline? Or
no, she can't go on.
please, Taline, say, and then Vahé will ask you a question. Yes, Taline, or listen.
When I think,
Yeah.
the other thing is that there was a kind of excitement, but also a little bit of fear, because it is the first film that I know of which is about a Western Armenian writer, and the native language of the film is Western Armenian. I don't know of any other work which in this category. So we were full of trepidation. There was a lot of uncertainty, which I think is good in translation. So.
Yeah. We didn't know how it was going to be received, Taline, right?
Yes. Vahé, yes.
I imagine my question probably would be for Mark and Hrayr and all the commentators on Vahé Oshagan. But, well, I'm studying diaspora, and in my experience, uprootedness and rootedness are both actually important kind of characteristics of diaspora. So they're both rooted and uprooted in a sense. Uprooted because they're coming from somewhere else, but they're also rooted in the societies in which they last for generations, even centuries. So I wonder if, in the case of Vahé Oshagan, the sense of uprootedness that comes from his literature, is it somehow connected also to the fact that he moved to so many places in his life, and whenever he had the feeling of having established roots somewhere, or being in the process of about to establish some roots, he would have to move somewhere else, because that would be himself, that would define his being and eventually his literature.
It makes sense, yeah. Please, comments.
Well, Taline, did you hear the question?
We can think about it this way, is that in a way, the language that he uses in his poetry, and also I would say in the novels and the short stories, is a language which has no roots, because it certainly is not the language of, it's not the language of the 19th century Armenian writers. It's not the language. It comes out of nowhere in a way. It is an orphan language at best. And I think that all of the characteristics of the language that he uses, I think, are related to this sense of the language not having any anchor. It's an unanchored language. And this is why there are so many images and sounds, and it's panic. It's a panicked language, which is a kind of expression of the uprootedness or the kind of the unmoored quality of the diaspora in a way.
Well, towards the
But
end,
it is
I'm sorry.
for him, I think it's very real. That is the reality of the diaspora.
It is interesting that you brought up the word anchor, because towards the end, the last scene that he's reading his poetry in front of that big house in San Francisco, he's talking about, is this it? There's no anchor. You throw the anchor and it goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's nowhere for it to hold. So for him, that's the thing. But I think he thrived in the diaspora. He really. This is my first experience with him. When in '84, when we moved from I had been in contact with many writers in Lebanon. Nobody ever mentioned Vahé to me, which is strange. I met him when I learned about his poetry when I moved to San Francisco, and we were at a dinner party somewhere, really noisy. This is Berkeley students, Armenian students, were having an event in a restaurant, and Vahé and I were having a conversation, and he asked me this question: Armenia or diaspora? And I said Armenia. And I had a reason to say that, because coming from a very disabled place, I was looking for some stability somewhere where we can, Armenians, decide how to live ourselves. He said no, diaspora, and that I started thinking about diaspora from that day on. So he lived in the diaspora, and then he longed for a stable place, and that's why I chose to keep that. The footage, by the way, we filmed those for the San Francisco Armenian TV program. So instead of fillers, like people put songs and dances, we thought we should put Vahé's poetry. And the broadcast time was on Sundays after church before lunch. So people would watch the stuff. But I think he really thrived in diaspora until Armenia became independent. Then there was, it became an issue for him.
What do you mean by became an issue?
He came back from his first trip. Arsena, you were together, right? You came back from the first trip. You were visiting San Francisco, and you were showing pictures, or somebody had taken pictures of Armenia, and he gave a lecture, and he said that Հայրենիքը ամեն ինչի իրավունք ունի, ամեն ինչ անելու իրավունք ունի. That the
fatherland has the right for everything.
Yeah. So.
Other questions, thoughts, comments, reactions?
All right, I'll ask another question. Taline, because I'd love to hear both of your views on this. So, I knew Vahé Oshagan when he was in his Philadelphia period. He was a very good friend. He and his wife were very good friends of my sister and brother-in-law, and we often had dinner together. And he was very helpful to me when we lost our first child, and we were at a church ceremony memorial for him. Vahé, as we were leaving, grabbed my shoulder and said, "Ujeglide," so this was very nice. But I always thought he was a strange guy, very strange. And he was a guy who loved to shock. He would say the most outrageous things at the dinner party, even, as I remember. But he was always incredibly interesting and entertaining. But here's my question. My question is, he seemed to be confronting, provoking, challenging Armenianness, Armenian traditions, Armenian conventions. At the same time, he was deeply embedded in Armenia and being Armenian and so forth, almost trying to redefine it, but always against whatever was accepted, traditional, given. How did that work? And especially when here's an artist who's making very non-conventional art against the grain, and you're trying to retrieve what's in the work itself. I'm just interested in that tension or contradiction between the provoking and the moving outside and the really being part of the Armenian.
I think
1 second.
I can only speak about, I will choose only to speak about the literature. I think Vahé Oshagan's allegiance was to poetry. I think he is a poet, first and foremost, and I think I can say this with some certainty, that poetry was his native soil. I don't think prose was the same. I think in the prose, for instance, Odzum is in some ways quite, presents a conservative argument, right? There is a conservative, there's a conservative thesis there about the Armenian church, about this and that and the other. And I think also in the commentary that he wrote, the literary commentary that appeared in Aspares, again, he was very much of a classical critic. It is in poetry that I think he is, if we want to use the language, the overused language, he is revolutionary. That's what I think. And I think there, he, in a way, in the poetry itself, gives himself the right to be the provocative enfant terrible, especially in the early works, in Beirut. I think the poetry changes when he leaves Lebanon, comes to the United States, comes into a different culture. I think that provocation decreases. And I think, as far as the persona that you're talking about, I think it was the persona of the poet that he projected. And the poet is the revolutionary for him. But I think it's a strange amalgam of conservative, kind of stable prose, I would say, and revolutionary, innovative poetry. I think so.
Well, and for me it was interesting, sort of the tension that Ron brought up between sort of the defiance against rules, but then he, as the poet himself, also said something quite profound, where he said, poetry saves my life, or writing saves my life, and I want to introduce some order into the chaos, right? So he, on the one hand, he's defying order, a kind of a particular kind of order, but then he's also so drawn to make meaning out of what he considers chaos by introducing some order. It was really an interesting tension there between the two.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, you're the
And
first
I
one
think
who
it's
asked
the
the
order
question.
of poetry, it's the order of form
Yeah.
that, that he's striving for. And I think that language always slips. Language always goes to places we don't think it will go to. And I think this also was a big issue, was a big problem is that what are the limits of language, and this attempt to make language and meaning congruent with each other. Again, this idea of towards something. There is always this movement towards something, but one never reaches it.
Yeah.
Which is the diaspora in a way. The homeless person.
That finds a home.
Fine.
Maybe.
Yes.
I have a historical question.
Mhm.
So, how did Vahé Oshagan actually find this particular way of writing? And this idea of breaking conventions, it is also found in Hrayr Eulmessekian's work. However, in Vahé Oshagan's work, it completely, it's in a completely different way. And in the film, it was called the Oshagan problem, or this idea of literary terrorism, or something that I recorded here as, I think Mark Bishanyan uses the word impulsdachar as a kind of a play. Considering that he comes, not maybe come, but he was educated in this, in a generation of writers, these Lebanese traditional writers like Voskeritchian and Sassouni, who published in Peking, for example. How does he find his own genre of writing that kind of sets the score for future writers that write like him, like Bolodian and et al.
I mean, my short answer, if I may, is to come to the lecture tomorrow. But maybe the guests here have some comments too.
Maybe Taline has something to say. I will have to say that it's interesting that it's your field and your research. I haven't done any research on this. But his early poetry, Karak, Badohan, were all dealing with the community. And then how the language that he uses, and when everybody says Vahé is very difficult to read, you don't need to open a dictionary to read Vahé. His vocabulary is very simple, but how he approaches things, and I think that's what made him write, was he was reacting to the realities of I would say Lebanese community, or their norms and their lives. And that's why Karak is important, because he is going everywhere in Lebanon, every institution, and he is challenging them with his own vocabulary, with his own words. And I say this everywhere. We have Krapar, we have Arev Mendahayren, we have Arevela Hayren, and we have Agumpi Hayren. And he is very fluent in all four of them. And in order to understand him, you have to also understand the Agumpi Hayren, when his intervention is there.
I want to maybe
So,
Taline, can you speculate maybe about the influence of Vahé Oshagan in contemporary poetry, in addition to the question that I was asked?
no, I can't. I wanted to go back, actually. I wanted to go back to the gentleman's question. I think Hrayr Oshagan had a profound influence, because and I know for a fact that Vahé Oshagan read his father not as his father, but as a writer. And I think he has told me this, that he learned a lot from him. And Hrayr Oshagan's writing itself is some people will say unreadable, right? And other people will say is so original that you have to learn Western Armenian all over again in order to read it. So I think his father was a great influence on him in the energy which one reads in or one sees in Hrayr Oshagan's work. So in a way, as you and I have talked about in connection to the novel. Vahé Oshagan's novel, I think, in a way, he is the answer, his poetry is the answer to the revolutionary prose of his father.
Yeah.
His father was a revolutionary in prose, and he was a revolutionary in poetry. He learned from him, but in a way, well, not in a way, but he rebelled against him. It's the diaspora and the empire against one another, I think.
You're referring to our panel in Lisbon this summer, right?
Yes.
And so Taline is talking about a novel that Vahé started in mid-80s, Vahé Oshagan. The Armenian title, it's called Hrayr. It's unfinished and unpublished, but there are 2 volumes, at least more or less complete. The manuscripts are there. And so at the end of his life, Vahé Oshagan was trying to measure up his abilities as a prose writer, but of course early on he didn't dare, probably. Or he dared just a little short story here, another one there. That's it, I would say. That's kind of my impression.
And I agree. I agree with what Hrayr said, because I think the revolt comes in Beirut, and I think the language of revolt and the apprenticeship of the language that he created is steeped in the middle class bourgeois niceties and follies of the Beirut Armenian communities, of the community of the 50s and the 60s. I mean, that's where it happens. And I must also add that the 60s were a period of profound innovation in Lebanese culture and literature too, in Arabic.
Yes.
And I think Vahé Oshagan was aware of that. And also he read Allen Ginsberg. He was the one who introduced me to Allen Ginsberg. He was the one who introduced me to Henry Miller, to pornography. I mean, he read all of these things. So all of it, the Lebanese, the international, and his own father's example, come together in those early works of the 50s and the 60s. Imagine your uncle introducing you to pornography. I mean, that's... Yeah.
How many therapists did you have to see?
Don't ask more questions.
In Tebig Yank, the full piece that I did with Vahé and reading his work and Hovan Ness's composition, I have, you know that, I have pornography in that, right?
Yeah, so, yeah, I know.
And I have Peleshian pornography and Vahé and...
True to the spirit, right? Okay, we are sort of out of time, but if there are any other comments or questions, if not, I just want to thank Taline.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Taline.
I want to thank Hrayr, of course,
Good to see you.
for being here. I want to thank our
Thank you
research
for
program again for making this possible. I want to thank our special guests, basically, for being here. And I want to thank everyone, actually, for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.